Hi, Ian, and welcome to the Modern Masculine Summit. We're so thrilled to have you here with us today. It's such a great event for us. And I'd just like to talk a little bit about how we met. So everyone, this is Dr. Ian Tenant from the UK. And of course, I live in Australia. And I happened to be in Australia last year doing some interviewing on the streets of London for my podcast. And I also attended an event. And I met Dr. Ian Tenant in a queue for this event in London. And it was extraordinary, wasn't it?
It was.
We just chatted.
Yeah, we just started chatting. We were, it was a very, very long queue. I don't know if anyone's been following what's happening with London Real. It was a London Real event. They've actually been in the news a lot recently because of the coverage of coronavirus. But we were queued up at that event, and we just started talking. And I really liked what you were doing with your podcast. And I explained that I was involved in a men's circle here in the UK, in Peterborough. And our conversation went there, and we realized that there's a lot of overlap in not just the topic of of masculinity and men's mental health and men's well-being, but also generally how we work, our approaches to well-being, our philosophy, and so on. So it was a nice chance meeting, and I'm really pleased and delighted that you've invited me to this summit.
Yeah, I love the work you're doing. I really did drop on when I stood next to you in the queue because your book is called Restoring Balance, and it's exactly what the world needs right now, isn't it? Because we actually have our own abilities really to be able to balance our body from all kinds of anxieties and stress. And your book, from your experience as a doctor, of course, as pointed all of that out and how to do it, and you've taken your own journey with that. Can you tell us all about the book and how it kind of works?
Certainly, yes. So you're quite right that we do all have the ability to restore balance and health, and that's really what the message I hope to bring to the viewers and listeners today is that our body is always on our side. It might not feel like it sometimes if we're feeling under the weather or feeling lousy or things are going bad in our life, but our body is always trying to bring us back to balance. That's what it always does. Having said that, in the 21st century, there are lots of things which can knock us off balance and take us out of sync with natural rhythms. But the really good thing is that there's simple things we can do, simple and easy things that we can do to give our bodies the right signals so that it restores its own balance. And I didn't choose the title for the book. My editor chose the title when I showed her the manuscript. The first draft of the book. I wanted to leave it up to her to choose the title of the book, and she did. And when she suggested that title amongst a few others, and as soon as I saw the title, I was like, yes, that is actually what the book is all about. Because our body is always on our side and our mind is always on their side. And sometimes we kind of forget that, and we can feel that, feelings like anxiety or whatever feelings are arising up within us, we can think of them as bad and get into kind of like a vicious circle with how we feel. But actually it's a signal from our body or from our mind that to pay attention to what's going on in our life. So yeah. It's an optimistic message, and I really look forward to talking more about that with you today.
Yeah. So tell me, obviously when we write something, generally we want to write about something that we've experienced, something that comes from a journey we've taken, and therefore we have this knowledge that, yes, you're a doctor and you've studied and you've obviously got all of this knowledge, but I think this book is coming from a totally different angle, that you'll have experienced something where you've thought, actually, this is useful, and I think it needs to be put into the world. What was your journey to get you to this point where you thought, I need to share this knowledge?
So really, it started as a teenager when I wasn't really happy with my health. I felt my energy levels were lower than other peers around me. I struggled a little bit with my digestion. My nasal cavity was always blocked. I was doing all right kind of school-wise, academically, but I was struggling to I felt in conversation I wasn't quite clued up and plugged into what was going on around me. So but luckily I had this sense that it wasn't just a built-in feature of me, that it was something I could change and something I could do something about. I had a whole lot of different interests at school, but I ended up going down the path of doing biology and chemistry and sciences for A level. And my teachers advised me that biochemistry was where all the future careers are at. I respected this particular teacher when it came to choosing what I wanted to do at university, and he said, biochemistry is where all the future is at in careers. So I took that degree. I ended up going to do a PhD in clinical and surgical sciences at Edinburgh University, where I was studying in a laboratory-based setting how our immune system works, basically, and different features of our immune system, how our immune system can get confused between friend and foe. Sometimes it sees things in our food or in parts of our body that it confuses for something threatening, like a bacteria or some other microbe, and then it turns on itself.
And everybody's body is so different then, isn't it? Because not everybody's body's behaving in the same way. So does it apply to different bodies in different ways? Like different people have different kind of makeups into how they react in this way?
Certainly, and that's a really good question for that particular topic, and it's also a good question for health in general. So it's that question of nature versus nurture, really. These days, we're often led to believe that there's a gene for everything. There's a gene that can give you this disease or that disease, or a gene to give you a certain personality trait, and that might be true to a certain extent. That if I've got gene, I'm a lanky 6'4" 6'4" tall person, so you could argue I've got genes that would make me a good basketball player, but actually I'm a rubbish basketball player. So that gene doesn't. It might be linked to the potential to be a good basketball player, but there's other things that need to be in place for that to happen. And it's the same with most diseases as well, and most even mental health conditions. There might be genes or traits that give us a susceptibility to something, but it's actually the environment that influences more strongly how we turn out. So the phrase that I like is that it's the genes that pull the genes that load the gun, but it's the environment that pulls the trigger.
Right. Can I ask you something about that? So does the immune system play a part in mental health then?
Yeah, it certainly can play a part in our mental health, and it's quite a topic that's interconnected to lots of other things. So a couple of years ago, there was quite a few research papers out that showed that there's a strong link between certain mental health conditions and inflammation. So what all of these different papers were trying to show is that if your body is inflamed, if you've got chronic inflammation in your body, then that transfers to the nervous system, and that affects our mental state and how we feel.
Wow.
So yeah, there is a link to the immune system, inflammation, and mental health. And I'm guessing, I expect many of the listeners and viewers will have heard about the gut-brain connection as well. So this idea that the health of our gut influences our, you know, our thoughts and our mental health and so on. So, you know, what's well understood now is if we've got a good broad range of gut flora, so different microbes, different friendly bacteria, then that can improve our mood. And a lot of neurotransmitters are actually produced in the gut and feed up to the brain. So if you look after your gut, then you can feel better. And people may have experienced as well, if you've been on antibiotics or had a bad gut, then that can mess around with your mood and make you feel lousy. So I imagine that most of the people watching or listening to this will have experienced that at some point in their life.
So what can you do if say somebody's on a bit of a mental health trip and they think, well, you know, I'm not feeling so well, I've got sore joints, I'm, you know, this is happening, that's happening. What would you say then? Okay, let's start restoring that balance back into your body to be able to kind of get rid of some inflammation or put some good flora in the gut, or to kind of really try to start embracing that.
Well, so that the gut and the food is one issue, but what I'd like to sort of emphasize first of all is that my approach to health, and is very similar to lots of other kind of natural health practitioners, and also I'd like to point out it's a growing trend in the UK for the National Health Service as well, to look at what's called lifestyle medicine, is to not just assume that health and well-being is just about diet and exercise. So certainly if we change what we eat, then that will improve our gut health and that will improve our well-being. But actually there's anything we do for our lifestyle will affect our gut health and affect our energy levels and well-being. So what I mean by that is there's 6 polarities which I think are important to balance, and I'll just read them out very quickly.
Yeah, sure.
And then we can maybe look at some of those if we've got time. So these are the 3 kind of opposing forces that can influence our health, and all of these can affect your gut health in some way. The first is light and dark. So the amount of light, daylight or artificial light, and darkness that we're exposed to at any point in time. The amount of calmness and arousal, so how much time we spend in a nice chilled out, relaxed state versus, you know, being excited and agitated. I'd just like to point out that all of these opposing forces, neither of them are good or bad. It's just a matter of balancing them out in our life. So the first 2 is light and dark. The second one was calmness and arousal. The third is feasting and fasting. And what I mean by that is the eating good quality food is great, but also remembering to stop and take a break from food is really good. And I'm guessing a lot of the people watching this will have heard of intermittent fasting or different types of fasting.
Yeah.
The fourth set of opposites is movement and stillness. So exercise, as we know, is really good, but sometimes too much exercise can be just as detrimental to our health as too little. So we can't medicate a stressful lifestyle with too much exercise. It's good to use exercise for stress management, but we can't become dependent or reliant on it, because it can be just as bad as any other kind of addiction.
Yes.
We've got 2 more left in this list. So connection and independence. So what this is it's about relationships, and that can be relationships to another human being like you and I are talking now, or it can be a connection or a relationship with a hobby, with work, and so on. So connection is a sense of feeling connected to something or someone, and then independence is that time of, you know, withdrawing, looking inwards, solitude, and you know, that threshold, because neither of these are good or bad on their own. It's just, where do we sit? Where does the pendulum swing? Then finally, and this is one which is more relevant for our current times, and if we were having this meeting, this summit 20 or 30 years ago, it would have been true, but it's true now in a different way. And this is the opposing forces of technology and nature. So technology and Zoom and the internet have allowed us to host this summit all across the globe, which is a wonderful, beautiful thing. But too much technology used in an inappropriate way can be detrimental to our health. So it's my belief, and the belief of many other people, that we need to balance that the time we spend engaging with technology with time away from technology. And so the word I use for that, it's open to interpretation, is nature. So that can mean lots of things for different people, but really what I'm saying is the time we spend plugged into the matrix, if we're going to be all kind of jargony about it, and the time we spend away from that doing all the other things that life is about, other than going into the internet or whatever form of technology you're using.
Which is true, right now in isolation, we're screen, aren't we? I mean, I know I'm having this battle with my kids, and that you've got to try and be entertained in other ways than looking at something. And as well, that keys back to your first point, doesn't it, of the light dark, with the kind of exposure to screen light at night. And they're all really solid principles. So give us a bit of a walkthrough about some of the things that you've applied that have really helped you to restore balance. Because I really, I always call it the baby bear's chair, that you kind of find that it's just right. You can't go too hard or too soft. You go the just right, because the extreme of anything is no good, is it?
That's it. No. Yeah. So I think we all get a little bit too caught up in one thing or another at a certain time. And that's part of having these types of discussions, to kind of bring that into our awareness. So your question about things that I've been implemented, or let's start with technology and screen time then.
Sure. And
how that relates to sleep. But actually before I say that, there's what I call a quadruple whammy of screen time. One of them is to do with light, and we'll talk about how that affects sleep. So too much artificial blue light, it's called blue light, it actually looks white, but it's on the spectrum of electromagnetic spectrum, we call it blue light. So that stimulates our mind. I'll explain a little bit about that in a minute, and inhibits our ability to sleep. But that's just one of the risks of screen time. The other three, the quadruple whammy. So we have hypervigilance. So especially at the moment, with all the news and the politics forming around the coronavirus, and comments on social media, constantly checking, getting this bombarding of news, social media updates. My phone, like yours, I guess, and many others, now does so many things. You might go on your phone to make a call, but you end up finding yourself in 6 group chats, checking 20 emails, answering someone else's call, and you haven't even done what you expect to be. So it can be quite stressful, just from a vigilance point of view. Then we have the technology or phones. There's an osteopath, he might even have been from Australia actually, coined this term text neck syndrome. So if I'm sat with my neck jutting out on my iPhone or my iPad or laptop, then that's a really bad posture for my neck, and it can end up with tight, stiff muscles, because you're bracing yourself for long periods of time. That makes us feel lousy, makes us feel uptight, and then we can get into this vicious circle. So there's lots of reasons why too much time at a screen is not good. But the issue of light, and how we balance that effect is, I think is quite powerful. So to explain why light is important. So if we imagine before we had electricity or artificial lighting, and especially LED lighting, then we might have had candles and fire and gas lights and so on. But the type of light given off by those traditional forms of lighting is kind of like a soft sunset glow. It's more of a reddy color rather than this bright white light we get now. And too much. So what should happen in the morning when we wake up? We get a little rise of an alertness hormone. I'm not going to call it a stress hormone. An alertness hormone called cortisol, and that rises up during the day and makes us feel active, alert, and want to kind of engage in the world and be busy and enjoy all the things that life throws at us. And that should tail off during the end of the day. And as that tails off, another hormone rises up called melatonin, and that makes us sleepy and makes us naturally want to rest and go to sleep at night. So as that builds, let's say around 5, 6 o'clock, and it continues to build to 7, 8, 9 o'clock, then we'll feel like we want to slow down, quieten down, and go and get a good night's sleep. If we've got too much bright white light towards the end of the day from flat screen devices, LED screen or fluorescent bulbs in our house, then that inhibits the amount of melatonin. So we feel less sleepy, and then we don't feel as naturally inclined to sleep, and we may struggle to go to sleep. Now, there's a lot of, we've been programmed for so many years with this idea of like, I'll sleep when I die, but actually you'll die sooner if you don't sleep. So it's a little bit of a, it's probably true, but it's not actually doing you any good. So I consider sleep my secret weapon. And if you can get a really good quality night's sleep, you'll wake up feeling much better and refreshed. And we all know this. It sounds like a simple kind of piece of advice your grandparents would give you. But
I really struggle to sleep, Ian. I have to say, I am a shocking sleeper. I've always been able to exist on very little sleep.
Okay.
And I think probably my lifestyle as well. I kind of try and shove a lot in when my children have gone to bed, so I try and get a lot done. And then I'm up, and people have often said, I don't know how you cope with such little sleep. But it's probably really bad for me, even though I've built a resilience then to be able to kind of operate on a couple of hours sleep or 3 or 4 hours sleep. That's very bad then, is it?
Well, I think it's the evidence suggests it's not ideal. Having said that, there's not a one size fits all answer. So if you're someone who survives on less sleep, it's not, you shouldn't get stressed about getting this ideal 8 hours sleep. I think, in my book, I've cited work from a sleep scientist called Matthew Walker, and he's written an excellent book, and he's a professor of in a sleep science lab. But he has been criticized by actually making people anxious because of the power of his message, making people anxious about not getting enough sleep if actually they're fine with 6 hours sleep. So I don't think it's a one size fits all. But if you are struggling to sleep and you feel rubbish because you haven't got enough sleep, then the point I'd like to get across is there's some things you can try for free that will possibly improve your sleep, and so you will feel less frustrated, less anxious, and wake up feeling more refreshed. So
just to clarify, I think I just want to kind of clarify, because I think then for people who are fine with having less sleep and they can bounce out of bed, good for you, that's great. But for people who are waking up thinking, oh my God, there are definitely things that they can do to ensure that they wake up feeling much more refreshed.
That's it. Yeah. So I'll give you a few of these, and hopefully we'll give the viewers some access to some resources they can download. So really, it's about trying to mimic what life was like before we had too many distractions and artificial light at night. So towards the early evening, just start to think, okay, I want to start winding down now. It might feel like I've got 1,000,001 things still to do, or I want to get 3 or 4 episodes in of a latest series on Netflix. But actually, some of those things can wait till tomorrow. And what we can do instead is to dim the lights at night. So turn off any bright lights in your room. You can, I haven't got my copy these to hand, but you can actually buy blue light blocking glasses. They look like they've got an orange lens to them, and you can use, if you do have an extra large flat screen in your living room, then you can wear those whilst you're watching TV in the evening. You can install blue light blocking apps on your phone. Many smartphones these days have the option for nighttime mode, or I can't remember what, there's different names for the mode you can put your phone in, so it gives the screen a slightly more orangey tint and reduces the brightness.
I did that after our last conversation. I did that with all my devices, Ian, and I also have done it on my computer as well, because there's a little switch in the top, and it does make a difference, actually.
It does.
It's like a real warm colour to it.
That's it, a nice warm colour. So if you've got a relatively new computer, then it may have that option. If not, you can download on your laptop an app called F-Lux, F-Lux, and it's free to download. It works for Mac and PCs. So that will find the time zone that you're in, and it will, following the clock on your laptop, it will dim it for you every evening. So it's not dim all the time. It will follow the time zone that you're in and do it according to what the light and darkness is outside of your house. So yeah, dimming the lights is one thing. Then the other thing is calming yourself down in other ways. So maybe, if you have got to do some work in the evening, try and do tasks that aren't going to get you agitated and upset, and instead choose things that are more calming. You might want to try breathing exercises, meditation, and so on. All these things are very simple, but they can help us wind down and get our bodies prepared for rest, because rest is, it is vital. It's the time when our bodies heal and recover, but also when our brain does all the filing and it makes sense of all the mixture of things we've experienced during the day. The other thing is about eating as well. So eating too much too late at night can, in one sense, it can kind of help knock you out, but it can also, put you into a food coma. But it can also make you sleep more restlessly and wake up in the middle of the night feeling uncomfortable and bloated and so on. So a lot of the kind of the fasting research and the time restricted eating research now says that try not to eat anything 2 or 3 hours before going to bed. And I struggle with this sometimes because of my work patterns, but it certainly does help you have a calmer night's sleep. Finally, keeping your bedroom temperature not too hot and not too cold, obviously, either. So cooler bedroom temperature can help you sleep.
Wow. Okay. So what would you say would be the prime time to go to bed?
Well, that's I'd say, I have to take average here, because it's I'm thinking now in England, in the UK, there's, in the summer, people need less sleep than the winter, because we have much more natural daylight, and where, our energy levels and our stimulation from daylight is much greater. So but I'd say on average aiming to get to bed by about 10:30 throughout the year. Sometimes of the year it might be a bit earlier than that, other times it might be later, and there'll be the individual differences we just talked about. But really, the old-fashioned saying, my girlfriend's nan, who recently passed away, she said this, that an hour's sleep before midnight is worth 2 hours after midnight. And that's, I think...
Brought up with that.
Sorry?
I was brought up with that saying.
Yeah.
It was, all the time. Come on, hurry up, 2 hours before midnight, for everyone. And I used to get that all the time.
Well, there's, some of these phrases are built on lots of generations of wisdom and experience, and now the science is backing them up.
Yeah. So what are some of your other tips then? We've done a fabulous job of sleep. So what do you think, some of the things that would be really relevant for the times that we're in at the moment? You know, there's a lot of unrest and insecurity about the future, isn't there? And there's a lot of worry about health and there's a real fear factor as well going on. What could you tell us about balancing something that would help with that?
There is a big fear factor, and it's going to go on for a long time as well. And with the economy that's just collapsing around us, that so I'm not trying to. What I'm about to say, I'm not trying to belittle any of these realities or these truths. And so and we've all got to take each day as it comes. However, having said that, I'd like to remind all the viewers and listeners of that, first of all, that our body and mind is connected. In fact, there's no separation between our body and our mind. And this, in some ways, it's obvious, but in other ways, it's easily forgotten. So the research and science now knows exactly. There are no gaps at all between when you or I have a thought, this invisible thought. When that happens, a cascade of events occur that always. So every time we have a single perception, there's always a change in our physiology in response to that. So this thought, this invisible thought that happens, creates a burst of electrical activity in our brain. You can measure that in a EEG device. There's this burst of electrical activity that leads to either more electrical impulses traveling through our body, or through neurotransmitters and hormones released from our brain, a flood of chemicals that goes through our body. And those electrical impulses and those chemicals have physical outcomes every time we have a thought. Now, it's just a matter of what sort of physical outcomes they have. Are they relatively neutral for our health, or are they beneficial for our health, or are they detrimental to our health? And that's really a very important thing to consider in these times. So paying attention to our thoughts and where our attention, paying attention to what our thoughts and how our thoughts make us feel can influence our health. So one of my favorite things is to be really aware of how much time I'm spent thinking about the coronavirus or the knock-on effects, or the isolation, how much time I'm spent engaging in the news and the media around this, which I personally spend quite a bit of time updating myself. I want to be an engaged citizen and want to understand what's going on in the world. But for all of that confusion which is out there, and it's still confusing for us all, because there's no real answers. For all that time of engaged in a sense of confusion, how much time can I tune into my body instead and connect with something that is not confusing at all? So my breath and my heartbeat. So focusing on my breath and my heartbeat, they're things that have been with me since the moment I was born, and they'll be with me until the moment I die. So they are constant and they are certain. Same is true, there's lots of different ways to meditate. You can meditate by focusing on a candle. You can meditate, so you don't have to tune into your body. You can tune into something external. You can repeat a mantra, but really what we're doing is we're reminding ourselves that actually the world is a safe place, even if it doesn't feel safe. And we're soothing our physiology and soothing our body and calming our nervous system down, switching from this sympathetic drive, which is a state of stress and alertness, to more of a parasympathetic dominant, which is rest and digest. And then we can get a slightly different perspective on what's going on in the world.
And that's that principle you just spoke about before, isn't it? The calm and the action. That's the balance between those two. Yeah. And I love what you said there about the breath, because I've said that to people who've been stressed, you know, you can always rely, you know, the breath's like the mountains. It'll be there forever,
Will
because,
be there
you
forever.
know, it's what you do. So if you know that, if there's nothing that you know, at least you know that if you can concentrate on how many seconds you're breathing in and how many seconds you're breathing out. Um, and I heard as well, let me ask you this. If you are counting, your brain can't actually think of anything else. So if you're having a breath and you count from, say, 1 to 4 slowly, does it actually stop the amygdala from kind of freaking out while you're counting your breath?
I'm not sure about the absolute answer to that, because I think, you know, we can have lots of different tracks or loops operating at
Yeah.
one time, but what it certainly does is gives you some focus. It's so for that moment you'll be focused on the counting,
Yeah.
and that counting is linked to your breath. So certainly it will divert some of your attention away from some, you know, harmful thoughts or stressful thoughts, and bring it to something different. My suspicion is that we can, you know, yeah, we can focus on counting, but this is my experience. Sometimes I can then put the counting onto like an autopilot track, you know, like a little bit like an earworm when you've got a tune stuck in your head. So it kind of shifts to that counting. So I'm kind of going, breathing in for 4, holding, breathing out for 5 or whatever. But then my mind then starts to go off onto another thought. So
Right.
really, because it's kind of crafty, what the body tries to do is it tries to automate as many things as possible. So the skill with the meditation and the breathing is to keep reminding ourselves what we're, you know, bringing our focus back, which expands our awareness, and brings us back into the present.
Mm.
So yeah, certainly the counting is a tool, but um, being
Depends
conscious
on
that
how crazy your mind is.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, yeah. Now, I just want to make sure that I ask about the fast and famine, feast and famine. At the moment, I don't know about anybody else, but food's a thing.
Hmm.
All of my friends that I'm talking to, all of the memes, we're all laughing about how much we're eating because we're bored, right? So we're kind of like, you know, and I had a joke with my friend now going, it's only elasticated waist from now. Like it's all just, you know, everything's going pear shaped. And so this feast or famine, this is something quite important for the moment, I would have thought.
It is, yeah, it is, because I mean, food's great. I love food, and I think it's a part of our culture and should be celebrated. Um, uh, but as you quite rightly said, a lot of us are spending more time at home. There might be a little bit of boredom. Some people eat when they're stressed. Some people eat when they're bored,
Mm.
and so on. So that temptation to just keep going into the fridge and snacking and so on, is very, very real. And I've noticed myself, me and my partner Kim, we commented that we'd had some, you know, bigger lunchtime meals for several weeks than we normally do. So the idea of fasting or time restricted eating or intermittent fasting is that we take a break. We deliberately decide to take a break from eating, and we all do this anyway. We none of us eat whilst we sleep, unless you sleepwalk and eat. But none of us sleep while we eat. We often go without food when we're working or focused on something else or distracted. So there's nothing magic about fasting, and we all do it to a certain extent. But deliberate time restricted eating, what that does is, we make a decision. And this is different than starvation. So often people say, oh, you're doing that starvation thing again. No, starvation is linked to, you know, imposed by some other reason, some external reason, and it's often associated with suffering, or people dying. But fasting is a positive decision we take for our own well-being. And you know, there's so much well conducted research now to show that when we stop eating, it's not our body doesn't shut down and stop doing things. Actually, it activates lots of new processes. So one of these is it can switch us into fat burning mode, and people listening to this might have heard of the idea of ketosis, which is when your body switches from using glucose and carbs for fuel to burning fat for fuel. And that has benefits for our brain and nervous system, on neurological disorders. But also it activates several other things. So it activates this process called autophagy, which is like a recycling of damaged components within our cells. So it's kind of like a spring clean or a recycling process. Wow. And it also can activate stem cells as well. So it's good for our repair and longevity. Mm-hmm. So very simply, it's taking a break from eating, and the best way to do that is to just stop eating a little bit earlier in the evening and have your breakfast a little bit later the next day. You don't have to go crazy and do these multi-day water fasts. I encourage my clients to just be a little bit playful and curious with the effects of fasting. And if anything, you don't have to try and lose weight with it. You can just use it to revisit your relationship with food. And on days when I decide I'm fasting and I haven't done it for a while, I just notice it's kind of funny how you find yourself moving towards the fridge and you're like, what, I've just decided I'm fasting, why is my hand reaching in for some snacks? So it's just good to learn about ourselves, really, and learn how we our bodies are always trying to help us out, really, by doing these things automatically. But actually, before we had the food agricultural system and the ability to get food 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, there would have naturally been times when we had less food and food was more of an effort to prepare. So it's just going back to these rhythms and cycles that have been around for millennia.
So what would you think would be an ideal kind of time? So somebody said, I've never done that before, I think I'll have a go. Is it 8 hours, 10 hours? What's the kind of where somebody could do it, and also, is it every day fasting for a certain amount every day, or is it the 2-5, or because I've heard of all these different things? What would you be your kind of, I think this is a great place to start.
Yeah, I think the 16-8. So what that means is you eat your eating window. So the first meal of the day and the last meal of your day, that's what we call the eating window. So you compress that to just 8 hours. So that might mean that you have your first food or calorific drink at 10 o'clock in the morning, and then you eat your last morsel at 6 o'clock in the evening. So that's an 8-hour eating window, and that gives 16 hours either side of fasting. And that's for some people that'll be a challenge, and for others that will be quite easy. At the very least, and this is what I'd say, at the very least, we should aim for a 12-hour fast. So
I was just thinking when you said 16-8, oh, that's great, that's just a night's sleep. But it's the other way around.
The other way around.
I was like, in the bag, that's no problem. But yeah. It would be a bit more challenging for people to go straight into the 16 hours, because it's like you say, isn't it? It's that mind again of saying, but you really are hungry. And so, yeah. I think it would be something to build towards for sure. But I've heard so many people that I know have tried it and said there's fantastic outcomes.
Yeah, it does. I mean, I've been fasting since 2012 on and off, and using different methods, and I'm always surprised at what I learn from it. But yeah, that 12, very minimum is 12. So that would be, if you're going to bed at 10:30, then stop eating at 8 or 8:30 in the evening, and try not to eat anything the following morning before 8:30. So that would be 12 hours. And that might not sound much to some people, but for others who, might be snacking up until they go to bed at 10:30, and then they have to eat early the following morning, get their breakfast in before they go to work, then they're eating and they're for more than 12 hours a day, and they're not fasting for 12 hours a day. So that's the research shows that's, when you look at the links between eating windows and different diseases, then it's necessary to take a break from food for at least 12 hours a day.
So next on the list, we've got one more to do, and then I think we're going to have to start closing our meeting, but I want to know more before you go.
Okay. Next on the list, what should we talk about? Movement and...
Well, the movement's important, isn't it, at the moment, because we're kind of trapped inside, and there's the thought that we can go out and exercise, but there's a real kind of grey area here, and people are not quite sure what to do. So what would you suggest? Because
what is the guidance in Australia? Sorry, what's the guidance?
Sorry?
What
Australia, we've been very much kind of don't go out really unless you have to go somewhere essential, and even if you do that, really you can only go out with family members. There's no socializing, and we've had like fences up along the beaches, and all of the equipment and everything, of course. Wow. is kind of taped off, and so and Australia is a very outdoors country, very outdoorsy country. Everybody's surfing, and there's lots of activity because the climate supports that. So it's actually been a hard time for people to kind of be just inside, and it can make you really stir crazy.
Yeah, so it's similar in a sense to what we've got in the UK. I think it's a little bit more relaxed here. We've been told we can go out once a day to do some physical exercise, but certainly big public parks and communal spaces are to be avoided. So
we can go out to exercise here, but there's people are a bit nervous as to whether what can we do. So, but yeah, everybody's walking dogs. The dogs are exhausted. Yeah.
So I would encourage people to make use of that quota, that daily allowance, or that quota in whatever way. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to go crazy, but the other reason for going outside is, whilst I said earlier to avoid artificial light at night, it's really important for our body clock to get natural daylight during the day, during the middle of the day, because that will help program our body clock correctly, so that cortisol and melatonin I talked about, and all host of other hormones, so that calibrates those hormones to rise and fall at the right time. So natural daylight, on exposing as much of your skin as possible. Obviously, don't get burnt. I know that's you're very aware of that in Australia, but some exposure to program your body clock. And again, this is a very real phenomena. It's very well understood now. So natural daylight and combining that with exercises is really good. Even if, I've done this in the winter when I've not wanted to go outside because it's really cold, but it's been a sunny day. I've opened my front door, the sun's low in the sky, so the sun has come in, and I've sat or done some exercise just in the where the sun comes through my door. So you don't even have to go outside to get some sunlight. And we can exercise indoors as well. That's the other thing to remember. There's so many incredible resources on YouTube and other channels for yoga, for even more gentle techniques than yoga. Something called Feldenkrais I'd encourage people to look up. It's great for relaxation. But also it gives the body a variety of different movements. So sometimes we can feel really stagnant and depressed and moody if our body is restricted and stuck and still for too long. So by waking the body up, being even just a good stretch, being creative, playing like a child, dancing, There's so many ways to move that for people who don't like the idea of exercise or feel they're not in the mood for exercise, just start simple. Just think, right, I'm going to crawl across my living room floor. If you haven't crawled like a toddler or a child for a while, then try crawling. Just see what that does to your physiology and your mental state. So in my book, I say variety is the spice of life when it comes to movement. So we need fast, we need slow, we need strong, we need soft and gentle, purposeful, spontaneous. Try all of those, but just move at the end of the day.
Because there's a real lack of motivation, isn't there? I mean, I think you go into isolation, there's a bit of kind of like, oh goodness, but it's all new. But then all of a sudden, week after week, the motivation to do anything or to move drops with that, because we are getting less sunlight. We are kind of losing our momentum and starting to really notice the effects of what we're missing. And so, is there any advice you could give that would help people to kind of activate something within them that helps with motivation?
That's a really, really good question. Because motivation is a funny thing, and different things will motivate different people. But this is where I'm going to say that technology can be quite a good resource for us. So if there are group training sessions that you have access to, so your local gym might be closed, or your local yoga studio might be closed, but they might be offering group Zoom chats. Or you could instigate yourself with a mate. Challenge your friends to do 20 press ups every morning or something like that. Use technology to do that. So reach out and connect with other people and use that energy, that group energy, to motivate you. Some people will be self-motivated, but most of us will push ourselves more if we're doing those activities with other people.
So is there anything you'd like to tell us to wrap up our time together? I know we've probably not covered everything that we would have liked, but is there something in particular you think, I think you should know this?
I think, this again sounds simple, but doing whatever, if you are struggling at the moment with the lockdown, then finding whatever means possible to reconnect to your own sense of power and control. And I don't mean control in a controlling way, but just in a sense where you feel, okay, I'm Ian, or for you, you're Helen, and you remember who you are. And that might be through, and that's one of the easiest ways to do that is through a routine. So it's easy to lose a routine at the moment, but having a routine and doing some things that we enjoy doing, trying to keep a little bit of a calendar or a schedule can help massively. So that will help us feel connected to ourselves, feel in control. At the same time, if you feel like you're losing control, remind yourself that that's okay as well. It's okay to have a meltdown. I had a bit of a mini meltdown at the weekend. But, I know that it's okay to do that. It's good to release all these emotions. And as long as you've got supportive people around you or some way to support yourself and to know that it's going to pass, then you can allow that kind of chaotic loss of control. So that's another set of opposites to balance: chaos and loss of control with some kind of routine and structure.
I think you're so right. It's so important, and we do need to recognize that there'll be great days and then there'll be terrible days. One day you wake up and you're really on your game. You know, it's just not so bad, you know. And then the next day it's kind of like, oh my God. And we are all in that kind of tumultuous time where we do need to really allow it, don't we, to just kind of flow through us and be wherever we are at any given moment. And yeah. So where can everybody reach your book? There's a link on your speaker page, isn't there, that they can download your book, but there's also a website. Tell us some information about how people can reach you.
So you can reach me on the links that are on the profile page on your summit. There should be a link there for my website. If it's no longer there, then you can go to restoringbalance.life/modern masculine. And there you can download some free resources, a chapter from my book about mastering stress in the 21st century, some chapters about body clocks and sleep, which we've talked about, plus also a download of my lifestyle recipes for wellness as well.
That's amazing. So everybody, if you want to go onto the speaker page for Ian on the Modern Masculine Summit site, there's some free downloads from Ian for you. So, and you're going to be on our panel this afternoon, Ian, aren't you, for some live question and answers for if anybody's got any questions around anything we talked about.
I'm really looking forward to that. I'll see you and everyone else later.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So thanks so much for your knowledge and wisdom, Ian, and we look forward to chatting again with you this afternoon. Many thanks.